With school shootings going nowhere in the immediate future, what are politicians supposed to do? We all know that there's all sorts of folks putting pressure from both the right and left, and we know what the anti-gunners want. No guns, just keep banning. But I have the opportunity to sit down today with Wisconsin State Representative Scott Allen, who has a different take and a different solution, and more that, frankly, I think we need to see more of. So guys, let's get into it. Representative Scott Allen, thank you for coming in here today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So explain what's your solution, or at least part of the solution, of what you've proposed for legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes from a philosophy of let's put all options on the table. There's no silver bullet, no pun intended, when it comes to addressing school shootings. The idea here behind the bill is to make sure that school boards have an option, if they so choose, to have their staff, a member of their staff who is licensed to carry, who is trained, who is knowledgeable about firearms, possess a firearms on school grounds. In the case that there's a break-in at the school and that there's somebody there with the intent to do evil, it's an option. It's not a panacea. It's not going to solve all problems, but it's an option. There are many schools in our state that don't have school resource officers, for instance. It would be economically unfeasible for us to have an armed officer in every school. And there are plenty of people who have sufficient background, knowledge, training as it relates to handling a firearm. So I say let's give school boards an option.
And you gave a lot of great information packed right into that answer. So one of the things I want to just kind of point out for viewers here is you're not mandating this across the state. You're making it basically, you're returning power to the local level where different communities can choose by their school boards of here's what I want to do. And of course, obviously in Wisconsin, school boards are an elected position. So in essence, this is returning the issue back to voters should it come to that. Is that a fair way of viewing it?
Absolutely, yeah.
So we all know what an anti-gun person is going to say. So I'm just going to, from my perspective, I'm sure your perspective, kind of softball you this question, right? Which is, well, look, more guns around children in schools. Is this really the solution? What good is a teacher who's armed and has been through concealed carry classes and maybe has some training? What good are they going to be?
Well, it's hard to predict the future, and especially given a set of variables that are really uncontrollable. There is a sort of knee-jerk reaction that many people have as it relates to firearms. I mean, you get somebody who has a negative feeling toward a firearm, and you put a firearm in their presence, they freak out. So just the very idea of it is hard for people to get their heads around. But the point that I keep making to people is that minutes matter. In a situation where our children's lives are in danger, every minute matters. And, the police aren't sitting right outside waiting for an incident to occur. They might be, 20 minutes away, 15 minutes away, 10 minutes away. If it's my children in that school, when every minute matters, if there's a staff member in the school that's willing and able to accept that opportunity to carry and, who's faced with a life or death situation, I think we improve the odds of success. I just think that it's an option for school districts to consider. There are many school districts where they're very, very rural, very spread out, and the chance for law enforcement officers to arrive on the scene quickly is slim to none. If an incident occurs in one of those schools, I think this might be a good solution.
And of course, we also have to acknowledge an uncomfortable truth, which is the fact that law enforcement is under no legal duty to intervene to save lives. And we've seen this, unfortunately, from Columbine through multiple different school shootings over the years, where law enforcement basically stages outside the classroom, outside the school. And I don't know if they're waiting for some sort of tactical advantage. I don't know if they're waiting for whatever the case may be. But in essence, they are allowing the mass wholesale slaughter of the children to continue rather than intervening. And of course, at the other end of the spectrum, as we saw in Nashville recently, we see swift, decisive action by brave men and women in law enforcement to immediately intervene, meet force with force. And ultimately, we've seen that save lives, thank God, so far. And when I look at this continuum of, well, we can call 911, we can hope that we have the local law enforcement can make a speedy response, which statistically we know it's not their fault, but minutes. Going back to your minutes matter, seconds matter, minutes will take the response. And then beyond that, we're then gambling on, well, what kind of response are they going to choose to make? And I 100% agree, I don't see the logic of, well, we know that in this world where there's force, sometimes the only response is force, right? And I don't see the logic of, well, let's, through government regulation, create and entice a scenario where sick individuals are going to go and create their evil acts, and then we'll disarm all the victims, and then we'll roll the dice on a timely and swift law enforcement response. First off, any response to that kind of monologue that I just had to get out there?
I appreciate that. Sometimes we have to. Can you name one school shooting incident where the shooter was not stopped through an act of violence?
None come to mind. I've seen a couple of videos on the internet where people have brought, I think there was a single video. A single video comes to mind where a bad guy brought a gun to the school. He ran into some sort of gym teacher or coach who was basically able to hug it out for him. But of course, that's one versus Lord knows how many.
Right. To put an end to a violent incident quickly, it usually requires force. So it's a question of who will engage that force and when. When minutes matter, my ideal would be to have a law enforcement officer engage that force. That would be ideal. They're trained, they know what they're doing, they're specialists in the area. Absolutely. In the absence of a law enforcement officer, the second best option would be to have somebody who's trained with a firearm, whoever that might be. Again, this bill is not a panacea. It's not to solve all problems, but it's an option, and it's an option that's founded in the basis of reality. It's sort of a reality check. Back in 1990, the federal government, in its wisdom, said, "Oh, we're going to create gun-free zones in all of our schools across the entire country." How's that worked out? We've seen gun violence in schools, active shooter episodes proliferate since 1990. The law, the gun control law that was put in place in an effort to stop school shootings or to prevent school shootings hasn't worked. It just hasn't worked. So I think we have to have a reality check conversation to say, how are we going to engage an active shooter where minutes matter? How are we going to do that quickly and decisively? And I just want to put all options on the table, and I think this is a good one.
You know, folks who have seen a number of my videos, whether recently or over the years, know that one of kind of the touchstone lines I keep coming back to is we can never judge legislation on the basis of intent, the intention of the legislation. We have to judge it based on the reality. What's the impact? How does it move the needle? And I don't think that it's any coincidence that depends which study you want to look at. It also depends on your question of what's the definitions. But the gist to it is that anywhere between 86 to 95% of mass shootings in this country take place in gun-free zones. And I realize that anti-gun groups and anti-gun politicians have come out and they've basically gerrymandered the vocabulary and the language. They've redefined what constitutes a mass shooting. But if you and I say mass shooting, we're thinking about the FBI definition of an active shooter who's trying to commit violence, mass violence, and they typically are in a public place. That's loosey-goosey, the FBI definition. And of course, a lot of these groups are trying to redefine it to basically include gang shootings, some domestic violence, and things like that. And as a result, it really suppresses the numbers. But if we go by the FBI definition of an individual who's committed to doing evil with a firearm, do you think it's any coincidence that anywhere from 86 to 95% of the time, depending on which study you want to believe, that they're in a gun-free zone?
Well, we're advertising where there's not going to be an opponent, right? We're putting that out there. In fact, in many cases, we post signs letting the evil ones know, look, you can enter here and there's a pretty good chance you're not going to face opposition. If I was intent on doing evil, that's sort of what I would look for. I don't want to face opposition. I want to accomplish my mission. That's the thing that I also try to explain to folks is that when we create laws, the laws are there to protect us, right? But they're followed by law-abiding citizens. Laws are not followed by criminals. By definition, anyone who's intent on doing evil will figure out a way to do evil, regardless of what the laws say. So if we create laws that don't allow people to get certain types of guns, or if we create laws that say, well, you have to meet certain background checks, or if we create laws that say, you can only have guns on Sundays, whatever laws we create, it doesn't matter to somebody who's intent on doing evil. And I want to confront evil. I want us to be able to face evil down and stop the threat that they pose as quickly as possible.
I saw a recent study and analysis of school shootings, and maybe we can kind of go out on this, but this is a really interesting one. And before I get there, folks, if you've enjoyed having Representative Scott Allen on, please show your support not only for him but also for his message as well by clicking like, sharing this video around, and of course clicking subscribe to make sure you don't miss any of the future content on this channel. We also may have a special bonus video coming out with Representative Scott Allen, where we're going to be peeling back the curtains about Second Amendment, his views about the future, how are things going between the parties, and so forth. So be sure to subscribe because you're not going to want to miss that. Representative Allen, I saw a startling statistic that was basically a bar graph that showed the amount of fatalities by school shootings going all the way back to the 90s. Something that really struck me was that there were a handful of spikes. And if you do the math on where are those spikes coming from, there's a common denominator. Columbine, again, some of these recent ones where the police do not swiftly intervene. And I'm going to broaden the lens. An armed individual did not swiftly intervene, and as a result, the massacre was allowed to continue. I look at that chart, and I'll see if I can post it up in the description box or a link to it. But I look at that chart, and to me, it seems like someone who's basically saying, yeah, let's keep the children, we don't want people protecting the children with a rapid response. We want a slow response, and then we'll roll the dice on that response about whether or not they're going to stage outside or if they're going to immediately go in and push the LPVO, so to speak. What would you say to those people in light of all the statistics and things we've talked about, if you could just get a message out to them?
Minutes matter. In a life-threatening situation, every minute matters. I can't speculate about, law enforcement strategy. I have a ton of respect for the folks that serve and protect us. And I think that, everybody that enters into law enforcement does so with the purest of intentions. Some are good, some maybe not, just like any other profession. But, in any life, threatening situation, minutes matter. Every minute matters. And the more quickly we can disengage, a violent perpetrator, the better.
Representative Allen, thank you for coming in today. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please feel free to check out some of our other great content, and we'll see you in the next one.